The transport cage rattled against the metal floor of the lecture hall as the Vorthak guards wheeled it into position. Inside, something massive shifted in the shadows, chains clinking with each movement. The assembled students of the Galactic Military Academy fell silent, their various species united in a mixture of fear and fascination. Commander Zix-9, a towering insectoid with mandibles that clicked when he spoke, gestured toward the cage with one of his forearms. Today, cadets, you will witness why humanity remains classified as a Level 7 threat species, despite their primitive technology and short lifespans. The cage contained what the galaxy knew as a Terran apex predator. The creature inside was enormous, easily 3 meters tall and covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the artificial lighting. Its eyes glowed amber in the darkness, and when it breathed, steam escaped from between massive fangs. This was a creature from Earth's ancient past, brought back through human genetic manipulation, a testament to their species' terrifying ingenuity. Observe the muscular development, Commander Zix-9 continued, his translator collar converting his chittering into standard galactic. Bone density approximately 4 times that of a Terran human. Bite force measured at over 1,500 pounds per square inch. This specimen could tear through battle armor as easily as tissue paper. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Among them sat beings from dozens of worlds, the crystalline Jatori, whose bodies chimed softly when they moved, the gaseous Nephim, contained within their environmental suits, the reptilian Orcs with their jeweled scales, and scattered throughout, a handful of human exchange students who watched with expressions the others couldn't quite read. The humans, Zix-9's voice carried a note of disgust, in their typical fashion refused to let extinction remain final. They brought back these monsters from their planet's prehistoric era, enhanced them and now use them as weapons of war. This particular specimen has been responsible for the deaths of over 200 coalition soldiers. One of the Jatori students, her crystalline form refracting the light into rainbow patterns, raised a delicate hand. Commander, if these creatures are so dangerous, why do the humans not simply create more? Surely they could overwhelm our defenses. Zix-9's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. An excellent question, Cadet Harmony of Stars. The answer lies in the humans' greatest weakness and their greatest strength. They form emotional attachments to these beasts. Each one is not merely a weapon to them, but a companion. They refuse mass production because they claim each creature deserves individual care and attention. It is simultaneously their most foolish and most dangerous trait. The creature in the cage moved again, and this time several students could see it clearly. It was magnificent and terrifying, with intelligent eyes that seemed to study each face in the audience. Its massive paws ended in claws that could easily rend metal, and its shoulders bulged with muscle that spoke of incredible power. The irony, Zix-9 continued, is that these emotional bonds make the humans fight even more fiercely. A human soldier whose companion is threatened becomes exponentially more dangerous. We have documented cases of individual humans taking on entire squadrons to protect these creatures. Near the back of the lecture hall, a human student named Sarah Chen sat quietly, her dark eyes fixed not on the commander but on the caged creature. While her classmates saw a monster, Sarah saw something else entirely. She noticed how the creature's breathing was shallow and rapid, how it favored its left rear leg, how its eyes darted constantly toward the exits. She saw an intelligent being in distress, possibly injured, definitely afraid. Sarah had grown up on a colony world where humans worked alongside various Earth species, both natural and genetically reconstructed. Her family had been part of the terraforming division, specialists in creating Earth-like environments on distant worlds. She knew the signs of an animal in psychological distress as well as she knew her own heartbeat. The specimen you see before you, Zix-9 was saying, was captured during the Battle of Kepler 442b. It had been separated from its human handler and was found 3 days later, having survived in hostile environment conditions that would have killed most galactic species within hours. Even alone, injured, and without support, it managed to eliminate a full patrol of our forces before being subdued. The creature's ears twitched at the sound of the commander's voice, and Sarah could see the intelligence burning in its amber eyes. This wasn't a mindless beast driven by instinct. This was a thinking, feeling being that understood exactly what was happening to it. Now, Zix-9 moved closer to the cage, his forearms gesturing dramatically. You will observe as we demonstrate the creature's aggressive response to perceived threats. The neural stimulators attached to its collar will simulate the stress responses that make these beasts so dangerous in combat. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew what neural stimulators could do. They were torture devices. Plain and simple. Designed to cause maximum psychological distress without permanent physical damage. Using them on a sentient being was considered a war crime under the galactic conventions. But apparently, those protections didn't extend to Earth species. The creature seemed to sense what was coming. Its massive head turned, scanning the audience, and for a brief moment its eyes met Sarah's. In that instant, she saw something that made her heart clench. The creature wasn't looking at her with the wild fury of a cornered beast. It was looking at her with the desperate hope of a prisoner begging for rescue. Zix-9 reached for the control device that would activate the neural stimulators, and Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor in the sudden silence. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the lecture hall, "I request permission to examine the specimen more closely." The insectoid's compound eyes fixed on her, and his mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Sit down, Cadet Chen. This is not an interactive demonstration." But Sarah was already moving, walking down the steps toward the cage with steady, measured steps. "With respect, sir, I believe there are aspects of human-animal bonding that the Academy's curriculum doesn't adequately cover. If we're to understand why humans fight so fiercely for these creatures, shouldn't we understand the relationship itself?" The creature watched her approach, its amber eyes tracking her movement. For the first time since being brought into the hall, it became completely still, as if it too was holding its breath to see what would happen next. The lecture hall fell into absolute silence as Sarah approached the cage. Every species present had their own way of showing tension. The Jatori's crystalline bodies dimmed, the Nephim's gaseous forms swirled more rapidly within their containment suits, and the Saurics unconsciously flared their neck frills. Even the other human students seemed uncertain about their classmates' actions. Commander Zix-9's forearms spread in a gesture of barely contained irritation. "Cadet Chen, return to your seat immediately. This specimen is classified as extremely dangerous. The cage's proximity sensors are calibrated to detect any approach within 2 meters. Sarah stopped exactly at the 2-meter mark, close enough to see the creature clearly, but far enough to avoid triggering the automated defense systems. This close, she could see details that the distance had hidden. The creature's dark fur was matted in places, suggesting it had been confined for some time without proper care. There were old scars along its flanks, evidence of battles fought long ago. But what struck her most was the intelligence in its eyes as it studied her with the same intensity. She was studying it. "Commander," Sarah said without turning around, "I notice the specimen appears to be favoring its left rear leg. Has it received proper veterinary care since capture?" Zix-9's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "The creature's physical condition is irrelevant to today's demonstration. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Now return to your seat before I have you removed from the Academy entirely." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, but Sarah didn't move. Instead, she slowly lowered herself into a crouch, bringing her eye level closer to that of the caged creature. The movement was deliberate, non-threatening, the kind of posture someone might adopt when trying to comfort a frightened animal. The creature's response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of growling or showing aggression, it moved closer to the bars of its cage as far as the chains would allow. Its massive head tilted slightly and a soft whining sound emerged from its throat. It was a sound of recognition, of longing, of desperate hope. "Fascinating," whispered Dr. Kelleth, the Academy's xenobiology professor, a spider-like arachnoid whose 8 eyes could process information far faster than most species. "The specimen is displaying submission behaviors typically reserved for pack leaders or bonded companions." Sarah slowly extended her hand toward the cage, palm up, fingers relaxed. The creature stretched its massive muzzle toward her, close enough that she could feel its warm breath on her skin. When she spoke, her voice was soft, carrying tones that seemed to resonate with something deep in the creature's consciousness. "Hey there, big guy," she murmured in a dialect of English that few in the galaxy had ever heard. It was the informal speech humans used with their animal companions, full of warmth and genuine affection. "You're hurting, aren't you? And scared. I know. But you're not alone." The creature's ears twitched at the familiar sounds, its amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that made several students step back involuntarily. Then, to everyone's amazement, the massive predator did something that defied every piece of military intelligence the coalition had gathered about these beasts. It began to purr. The sound was deep and rumbling, like distant thunder or the engine of a starship, but unmistakably the contented sound of a creature finding comfort. The chains that bound it clinked softly as its body relaxed for the first time since being brought into the lecture. "All impossible," breathed Commander 6-9. "These creatures do not make such sounds except in the presence of their bonded handlers. How is she?" "Because she understands," Dr. Kelleth observed, her multiple eyes recording every detail of the interaction. "Look at her posture, her breathing, her vocal patterns. She's not treating it as a weapon or a monster. She's treating it as what it actually is." "And what exactly is that?" demanded 6-9. "A person," Sarah said quietly, still focused on the creature. "Not human, but a person nonetheless. Intelligent, emotional, capable of forming bonds and experiencing trauma. The humans who work with these beings don't see them as weapons. They see them as partners, as family." She slowly rose from her crouch and the creature's eyes followed her movement. "This one has been separated from his human for months, hasn't he? Probably captured during that battle you mentioned. He's been alone, confused, probably thinking his human abandoned him or died. Neural stimulators would be psychological torture for a being this intelligent." The creature made another soft sound, almost conversational, as if responding to Sarah's words. She nodded as if she understood, and perhaps on some level she did. "The real question," Sarah continued, turning to face the assembled students, "isn't why humans bond with these beings. It's why the rest of us refuse to recognize what they actually are. We call them weapons because it's easier than admitting we're keeping sentient beings in cages." The lecture hall erupted in startled chatter. Students from various species began talking rapidly among themselves in their native languages, their universal translators struggling to keep up with the flood of communication. Commander 6-9's exoskeleton actually creaked as he drew himself up to his full height. "Cadet Chen, you are speaking of classified military assets as if they were citizens of the Coalition. These creatures are property of the human military forces, nothing more." "Then why?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying clearly over the noise. "Does he keep looking at the exit? Why does he react to kindness? Why does he show clear signs of depression and anxiety?" "Property doesn't grieve, Commander. Property doesn't hope for rescue." As if summoned by her words, the creature turned its massive head toward the main entrance of the lecture hall. Its nostrils flared, scenting something that the other species couldn't detect. Its entire body went rigid, not with fear or aggression, but with desperate anticipation. The sound that emerged from its throat was unlike anything they had heard before. It was a call, deep and mournful and full of longing, the sound of a soul crying out across impossible distance for the one thing it valued most in the universe. And from somewhere in the corridor beyond the lecture hall, impossibly faint but unmistakably real, came an answering call. The answering call that echoed through the corridors sent a shockwave through the lecture hall. The creature in the cage began to pace frantically within the confines of its chains, its massive head turning toward the entrance with desperate hope. The sound it made in response was heartbreaking, a combination of joy and anguish that needed no translation. Commander 6-9's forearms moved in sharp, agitated gestures as he activated his communication device. "Security to Lecture Hall 7 immediately. We have an unauthorized presence in the Academy corridors." But before the guards could respond, the main doors burst open with enough force to dent the reinforced metal. The being that entered moved with fluid grace despite being encased in what appeared to be improvised armor, cobbled together from a dozen different sources. The figure was human, that much was clear, but everything else about them spoke of someone who had been living on the edge of civilization for far too long. The newcomer's gear was a patchwork of human military equipment, salvaged alien technology, and modifications that defied easy categorization. Their face was hidden behind a helmet that had been welded together from two different designs, and weapons hung from every available surface of their body. But most striking of all was the way they moved, with the predatory grace of someone who had learned to survive in a galaxy that considered their species a threat. "That's far enough," the figure said, their voice artificially modulated by the helmet's speakers. "I'm here for my partner." The creature in the cage went absolutely wild with joy, pressing itself against the bars and making sounds that could only be described as sobbing with relief. The human took a step forward, and every weapon in the lecture hall was suddenly trained on them. Stand down immediately, Commander Zix-9 commanded, his own sidearm drawn. You are in violation of Academy airspace, coalition security protocols, and interspecies warfare conventions. The human laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Warfare conventions? That's rich, coming from someone who's been torturing my partner for the past 3 months. Sarah found herself stepping between the human and the assembled weapons, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Wait, everyone, just wait. Let's talk about this before someone gets hurt. The human's helmet turned toward her, and even through the modulated voice, she could hear genuine surprise. You're the one who's been talking to him. I can smell your scent on the air near his cage. Thank you. How did you find him? Sarah asked, genuinely curious despite the tension crackling through the air. I never stopped looking. The human replied simply. Marcus and I have been together for 7 years. He was taken during the evacuation of Kepler 442b when our transport was shot down. I've been tracking him ever since. Commander Zix-9's mandibles clicked rapidly.
Impossible.
Our intelligence reports indicated that the handler was killed in the crash. Your intelligence was wrong. The human began walking slowly toward the cage, ignoring the weapons tracking their movement. I've been following your prisoner transports for months, gathering information, waiting for the right moment. When I heard he was being brought here for demonstration purposes, the modulated voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Well, let's just say I have strong feelings about people who use my family as props. Marcus, the creature in the cage, pressed himself against the bars as his human approached. The sounds he made were pure emotion, a mixture of relief, love, and desperate need for contact. The human reached the cage and immediately began examining the locks and restraint systems. Neural stimulators, the human said, their voice tight with controlled rage. Sensory dampeners. Muscle inhibitors. You've been slowly torturing him for months. Dr. Kelleth, who had been observing the interaction with scientific fascination, spoke up. The specimen was secured according to standard containment protocols for dangerous fauna. The human's helmet snapped toward her, and even the arachnoid professor took an involuntary step back. Fauna? Marcus graduated from the Terran Military Academy with honors. He speaks 4 languages fluently, can perform complex mathematical calculations, and has saved my life more times than I can count. He's not fauna, he's my brother. Sarah watched the interaction with growing understanding. You're bonded, she said softly. Not just trained together, but actually psychologically bonded. The Terran Pact Bond Protocol, the human confirmed, beginning to work on the cage's electronic locks with tools that seemed to appear from nowhere. Military volunteers undergo psychological conditioning to form permanent emotional connections with enhanced partners. It makes both parties more effective in combat, but it also means... They paused, their hands stilling on the lock mechanism. It means that what they've been doing to him, I've been feeling too. The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah understood now why the human had seemed so desperate, why they had risked infiltrating a heavily fortified military academy. The bond between them wasn't just professional or even emotional. It was literally neurological, a connection that meant Marcus's suffering had been the human's suffering as well. Commander Zix-9 raised his weapon higher. Step away from the cage. The specimen will remain in coalition custody, for study and demonstration purposes. The human's response was to produce a device that none of the alien species recognized, but that made every human in the room take a sharp breath. It was small, black, and covered in warning symbols in multiple Earth languages. Quantum destabilizer, Sarah whispered. That's a planet killer. Modified for localized effect, the human confirmed casually. Range of about 50 meters. Just enough to level this section of the academy and free my partner from his suffering, if you won't let him go. The standoff stretched taut between them. Weapons trained on the human's finger hovering over a device that could kill them all. And in the center of it all, Marcus watching with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand exactly what was happening. Then Sarah did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked over to Commander Zix-9 and gently pushed his weapon down. Commander, she said quietly, I respectfully request that you order the release of the prisoner. Zix-9's compound eyes fixed on her. Have you lost your mind, Cadet? This is a coalition military facility, not a negotiating table. No, sir, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. This is a school, and right now, we have a chance to learn something far more valuable than how to intimidate people with caged, sentient beings. We have a chance to learn what it really means to be human. The tension in the lecture hall was so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Students from a dozen different species watched in fascination and terror as the standoff continued. The human with the quantum destabilizer remained perfectly still, their finger poised over the activation switch, while Marcus pressed against the bars of his cage, amber eyes moving between his bonded partner and the weapons trained on them both. Dr. Kelleth's 8 eyes moved independently as she processed the situation from multiple angles simultaneously. "Commander Zix-9," she said carefully, "I believe Cadet Chen may have a valid point. From a purely scientific perspective, this situation presents an unprecedented opportunity to observe authentic human companion bonding behavior. This is not a research opportunity," Zix-9 snapped, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "This is a security breach by a terrorist who has threatened to destroy Academy property." The human laughed, the sound bitter and hollow through their helmet speakers. "Terrorist? I'm a decorated veteran of 3 campaigns. I've bled for the Coalition, lost friends defending Coalition worlds, and this is how you repay that service? By torturing my partner for entertainment?" Sarah moved slowly toward the center of the room, positioning herself where she could address both the human and the commander. "What's your name?" she asked the armored figure. "Captain Elena Vasquez, Terran Expeditionary Forces," came the reply. "Serial number TXF7749 Delta. And before you ask, yes, I'm officially listed as killed in action. Made it easier to move around the galaxy undetected." "Captain Vasquez," Sarah said formally. "I'm Cadet Sarah Chen. I've been studying interspecies relations, and I have to ask, what would it take to resolve this situation peacefully?" Elena's helmet tilted slightly. "Simple. Release Marcus, remove those torture devices from his body, and let us walk out of here. In return, I'll submit to voluntary questioning about human military tactics. Fair exchange of information." Commander Zix-9's exoskeleton creaked as he drew himself up to full height. "Absolutely not. The specimen is valuable Coalition property, and you are a fugitive terrorist. Neither of you will be leaving this facility." "Then we'll leave together in pieces," Elena said calmly, her finger moving closer to the destabilizer's trigger. It was then that Marcus did something that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. The massive creature, who had been watching the exchange with obvious intelligence, suddenly sat back on his haunches and began to speak. The sounds that came from his throat were not the growls or roars that the students expected. They were complex, modulated vocalizations that followed clear linguistic patterns. He was speaking in a language that none of the Coalition species recognized, but that Elena obviously understood perfectly. "He says," Elena translated, her voice softer now, "that he doesn't want anyone to die because of him. He says the young human with the kind eyes has been trying to help, and he doesn't want her to be hurt." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He's been protecting me this whole time, hasn't he? Even while being tortured, he was worried about a stranger's safety." Elena nodded. "That's who he is. Marcus doesn't think about himself first. He thinks about his pack, his family, the people he's responsible for protecting. It's what makes him so effective in combat, and it's why what they've been doing to him is so—" She paused, struggling for words. "It's why it's been killing both of us." Dr. Kelleth moved closer, her arachnoid legs making soft clicking sounds on the floor. "Captain Vasquez, if I may ask, how long have you and Marcus been bonded?" 7 years, 4 months, 16 days, Elena replied without hesitation. "Since we were both selected for the pack bond protocol. Marcus was enhanced from base genetic material, but his personality, his intelligence, his emotions, those are all his own. The bond just allows us to communicate and coordinate more effectively." "And you feel what he feels?" Dr. Kelleth pressed, her scientific curiosity overriding the dangerous situation. "To a degree, yes. Pain, fear, joy, contentment. It's not telepathy. More like emotional resonance. When he's happy, I feel lighter. When he's in pain—" Elena's voice trailed off. Marcus spoke again, his complex vocalizations carrying clear emotional undertones. Elena listened carefully before translating. "He wants to know if the Coalition has decided that enhanced beings like him have no rights. He says he understands being a prisoner of war, but he doesn't understand being treated like an animal, when he can think and feel just as clearly as anyone in this room." The question hung in the air like a moral challenge. Around the lecture hall, students began murmuring among themselves. The crystalline Jatori chimed softly in their musical language, while the gaseous Nephim swirled more rapidly within their containment suits. It was a young Soric student who spoke up first, his jeweled scales catching the light as he stood. "In my culture," he said slowly, "intelligence determines personhood, not species of origin. If this being can speak, reason, and make moral decisions, then by Soric's law he is a person." A Jatori student added her melodic voice to the discussion. "The harmony of stars recognizes any being capable of suffering as deserving of protection from unnecessary harm. What has been done here violates our most fundamental beliefs." Commander Zix-9 found himself facing not just an armed human and a dangerous creature, but an entire lecture hall of students questioning the morality of his actions. "The Coalition's position on enhanced fauna is clear," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The Coalition's position," Elena said quietly, "is about to change. Because if you don't release my partner, I'm going to activate this device, and then the galaxy is going to know that the Great Coalition Military Academy was destroyed by one human with a personal grudge. How's that going to look in the history books?" Sarah stepped forward again. "There's another option," she said. "Captain Vasquez, what if Marcus was officially classified as a Coalition citizen? What if enhanced beings were given legal protection and rights?" Elena's helmet turned toward her. "You think the Coalition would agree to that?" "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that the Coalition is about to learn something important about humanity. We don't just fight for resources or territory or political ideals. We fight for family. And if the galaxy wants to coexist with us, they need to understand that our definition of family is broader than most species would consider possible." Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying a note of hope that needed no translation. Elena listened, then looked around the lecture hall at the assembled students and faculty. "He says," she translated, "that he would like very much to be a citizen of something again. He's tired of being property." The weight of Marcus's translated words settled over the lecture hall like a blanket of profound silence. Here was a being, enhanced and modified beyond his original genetic template, asking for something as fundamentally basic as the right to exist as more than property. The students, representing dozens of species and thousands of years of combined galactic civilization, found themselves confronting a question none of their governments had been willing to address. Elena's grip on the quantum destabilizer remained steady, but Sarah could see the slight tremor in her other hand, the only outward sign of the emotional toll this confrontation was taking. "The thing is," Elena said, her modulated voice carrying across the silent hall, "Marcus isn't the only one. There are thousands of enhanced beings serving in human forces across the galaxy. Bears, wolves, big cats, cetaceans, even some enhanced corvids and cephalopods, all of them bonded to human partners. All of them with intelligence levels that would qualify them for citizenship in most Coalition member species." Dr. Kelleth's multiple eyes focused on Elena with laser intensity. "You're suggesting that humanity has been creating an entire subspecies of sentient beings?" "Not creating," Elena corrected. "Awakening. The intelligence was always there. We just found ways to enhance and express it. Marcus isn't a manufactured mind. He's an evolved consciousness given the tools to reach his full potential." Commander Zix-9's mandibles clicked nervously. Even if that were true, the legal implications would be staggering. Citizenship rights, legal representation, property ownership, political participation. The Coalition Charter would need to be completely rewritten. "Maybe it should be," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe a civilization advanced enough to travel between stars should be advanced enough to recognize intelligence wherever it appears." The young Sauric student who had spoken earlier stood again, his scaled crest rising in a display of conviction. "I propose a formal inquiry," he announced. "Let the Assembly of Worlds examine this case and determine whether enhanced beings qualify for citizenship rights." "Seconded," chimed the Jatori student, her crystalline body brightening with determination. "Thirded," added a Nephim, their gaseous form swirling rapidly within their containment suit. Elena turned her helmet toward Marcus, and the two engaged in a brief exchange of complex vocalizations. When she turned back to address the room, her posture had shifted subtly. "Marcus appreciates the support," she translated, "but he wants to make something clear. He's not asking for special consideration because he's enhanced or because he's bonded to a human. He's asking for recognition of what he already is. A thinking, feeling person who has been serving the Coalition faithfully for years. Marcus moved to the front of his cage and began speaking directly to the assembled students. His voice carried emotional undertones that transcended language barriers. Even without translation, his meaning was clear. He was pleading his case, asking to be seen as more than the sum of his genetic modifications. When he finished, Elena's voice was thick with emotion. He says that he has served on 17 different worlds, helped evacuate civilian populations during 3 separate conflicts, and saved the lives of over 40 Coalition citizens. He's bled for causes he believed in, mourned friends who died in service, and celebrated victories alongside species from across the galaxy. If that doesn't make someone a citizen, he wants to know what does. The argument was simple, elegant, and completely unanswerable. Around the lecture hall, students began standing one by one, adding their voices to the growing chorus of support. Even some of the faculty members looked uncomfortable with the situation they found themselves in. Commander Zix-9 found himself increasingly isolated as the moral weight of the situation pressed down on him. "This is not a debate forum," he said desperately. "This is a military academy, and that," he pointed at Marcus, "is military equipment." "No," said a new voice from the entrance to the lecture hall. "He's a Coalition citizen." Everyone turned to see Admiral Tythea, a distinguished Satori whose crystalline form glowed with the authority of high rank. Her presence changed the entire dynamic of the situation, as she was one of the few beings in the galaxy with the authority to make binding legal decisions on behalf of the Coalition. Elena's finger moved away from the destabilizer's trigger as the Admiral approached. "Admiral Tythea," she said formally. "I wasn't expecting Coalition High Command to respond so quickly." "Word travels fast when someone threatens to destroy a military academy," Admiral Tythea replied, her melodic voice carrying gentle reproach. "Though I admit the more I learned about the circumstances, the more interested I became in resolving this peacefully." Marcus spoke again, his voice hopeful but cautious. Elena listened carefully before translating. "He says he would be honored to speak with you directly, Admiral, if his words would be heard fairly." Admiral Tythea's crystalline form brightened with surprise. "He wishes to represent himself, without translation or human advocacy?" Elena nodded. "Marcus is fully capable of speaking Coalition standard. He's been listening to everything said in this room and understanding every word. He only used his native vocalizations to ensure accurate emotional context." The Admiral approached the cage slowly, her crystalline form chiming softly with each step. "Marcus," she said directly, "I am Admiral Tythea of the Coalition High Command. Would you be willing to speak with me about your situation?" For the first time since being brought into the lecture hall, Marcus stood to his full height. When he spoke, his words were in perfectly accented Coalition standard, his voice deep but unmistakably intelligent. "Admiral Tythea," he said formally, "I would be honored to discuss my status with you. But first I must ask, am I speaking to you as a prisoner requesting mercy or as a sentient being requesting justice?" The question cut to the heart of everything that had happened. Admiral Tythea's form dimmed slightly as she considered the implications. "I believe," she said carefully, "that depends on what you have to say." Marcus looked around the lecture hall, his amber eyes taking in each face before returning to the Admiral. "Then I have much to say, and I hope you have time to listen, because this conversation will determine not just my fate, but the fate of thousands of my brothers and sisters who are still serving the Coalition, without recognition or rights." The stakes had just grown exponentially larger than anyone in the room had imagined. Admiral Tythea's crystalline form pulsed with soft light as she processed Marcus's words. The simple request to be heard as a sentient being rather than property had transformed what began as a security incident into something far more significant. She gestured to Commander Zix-9, who reluctantly stepped aside, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed frustration. "I am prepared to listen," Admiral Tythea said formally, "but I should inform you that this conversation is being recorded and will become part of the official Coalition record. Your words may have far-reaching consequences." Marcus nodded slowly, his amber eyes reflecting both intelligence and determination. "I understand, Admiral, and I speak not just for myself, but for all enhanced beings currently serving the Coalition without legal recognition." He paused, gathering his thoughts. then began to speak with the measured cadence of someone who had long considered these arguments. 7 years ago, I emerged from the enhancement process with full consciousness and memory intact. I was not manufactured or programmed. I was awakened to my full potential through human genetic science. But my thoughts, my feelings, my moral choices are entirely my own. The first thing I remember thinking as a fully conscious being was gratitude for the gift of awareness. Elena had holstered her destabilizer and moved closer to the cage, close enough to offer moral support, but far enough to avoid triggering any remaining security systems. From the moment of my awakening, Marcus continued, I chose to serve the Coalition, not because I was programmed to, not because I was forced to, but because I believed in the principles of cooperation and mutual protection that the Coalition represents. In the years since, I have served on worlds I chose to defend, alongside beings I chose to call friends, fighting for causes I chose to support. Dr. Kelleth's 8 eyes tracked Marcus's movements as he spoke, recording every nuance of his expression and posture. The specimen demonstrates clear, autonomous decision-making processes, she observed quietly. I am not a specimen, Marcus said gently but firmly. I am Marcus Chen Vasquez, taking my name from both my birth designation and my bonded partner's family line. I have preferences in food, music, literature. I have formed friendships with beings from 17 different species. I have mourned the deaths of comrades and celebrated the births of their children. Admiral Tythea's form brightened slightly. You consider yourself to have a surname. Elena adopted me into her family line when we bonded, Marcus explained. In human culture, family names represent belonging, heritage, connection. These concepts have meaning to me beyond their biological origins. Sarah found herself deeply moved by the simple dignity with which Marcus presented his case. Around the lecture hall, students leaned forward, hanging on every word. This was no longer about military procedure or academic demonstration. This was about the fundamental question of what constituted personhood in a galaxy of diverse sentient species. Admiral, Marcus continued, I have filed formal reports, contributed to tactical planning sessions, and participated in diplomatic negotiations. I have been decorated for valor and cited for exemplary service. Yet according to Coalition law, I have no more legal standing than the chair you might sit in. I cannot own property, enter contracts, or even legally represent myself in proceedings that determine my fate. The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy cloak. Commander Zix-9 shifted uncomfortably, his earlier certainty about the situation visibly cracking. Furthermore, Marcus said, his voice taking on a note of profound sadness, there are thousands of enhanced beings like me serving throughout Coalition space. Bears working as heavy construction specialists on colony worlds, Cetaceans serving as deep space navigators, Corvids working in communications and intelligence, all of them conscious, all of them choosing to serve, all of them legally classified as property. Admiral Tythea moved closer to the cage, her crystalline form chiming softly. Marcus, what would you say to those who argue that enhanced beings, however intelligent, are fundamentally artificial constructs? Marcus's response was immediate and passionate. I would ask them to define what makes a being natural. I was born from genetic material that evolved over millions of years on Earth. My consciousness emerged from neural structures that developed through natural processes, enhanced but not replaced by human science. If I am artificial, then so is every Coalition citizen who has received medical enhancement, cognitive augmentation, or life extension treatments. The logic was unassailable, and several students began murmuring agreement. Even some of the faculty members nodded thoughtfully. More importantly, Marcus continued, I would ask them to consider not what I am made of, but what I choose to do with my consciousness. I choose to love, to serve, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I choose to honor the memory of fallen friends and work toward a future where all sentient beings can coexist peacefully. Are these not the qualities that define citizenship in the Coalition? Elena stepped forward, her helmet retracting to reveal a face marked by years of war and worry, but also by unshakable determination. Admiral, Marcus has saved my life 17 times. I've saved his 12 times. We've served together in combat zones where the difference between success and failure was measured in seconds and decided by trust. You can't build that kind of relationship with property. You can only build it with a person. Admiral Tythea's form dimmed as she considered the arguments presented. The legal implications of what you're requesting are staggering. Citizenship for enhanced beings would require amendments to the Coalition Charter, new legal frameworks, complete restructuring of military protocols. Yes, Marcus agreed simply. It would require the Coalition to evolve, just as individual species evolve when they encounter new challenges. The question is whether the Coalition has the moral courage to take that step. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down before the entire galactic community. Around the lecture hall, representatives of dozens of species found themselves confronted with a decision that would define the moral character of their civilization for generations to come. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and determined. Admiral, I request permission to speak as a witness to this proceeding. Admiral Tythea's crystalline form brightened. Permission granted, Cadet Chen. I've spent the last hour observing Marcus's behavior and interactions, Sarah said formally. By every measure I know for evaluating intelligence, emotional depth, and moral reasoning, he exceeds the baseline requirements for citizenship in any Coalition member species. To deny him legal recognition based solely on his genetic origins would be to admit that our civilization values biological purity over individual worth, the words echoed. Through the lecture hall with the force of moral certainty, Admiral Tythea looked around the room, taking in the faces of students and faculty who would represent the future of galactic civilization. Very well, she said finally. Marcus Chen Vasquez, I hereby grant you provisional citizenship status, pending formal review by the Coalition Assembly. Commander Zix-9, order the immediate release of Citizen Marcus and the removal of all restraint devices. The lecture hall erupted in cheers from multiple species as history was made before their eyes. 6 months later, the same lecture hall that had witnessed Marcus's plea for recognition now hosted a very different kind of gathering. The Academy had become the center of what historians would later call the Great Awakening, as enhanced beings from across Coalition space came forward to claim their citizenship rights. Sarah stood at the podium where Commander Zix-9 had once demonstrated the specimen, now addressing an audience that included not just students, but diplomats, legal scholars, and journalists from across the galaxy. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed statistical data that would have been unimaginable just months before. The Coalition Registry of Enhanced Citizens now includes over 15,000 individuals, Sarah reported to the assembled crowd. Bears, wolves, cetaceans, corvids, cephalopods, and dozens of other species, all granted full legal recognition and citizenship rights. The transition has been remarkably smooth, with enhanced citizens contributing to every sector of Coalition society. In the front row, Marcus sat proudly wearing the formal uniform of a Coalition diplomat, his status having evolved from prisoner to one of the primary advocates for enhanced rights. Beside him, Elena had traded her improvised armor for the dress uniform of a Coalition military advisor, their partnership having become a model for human-enhanced cooperation. Admiral Tythea, whose courage in that first moment had set everything in motion, now served as head of the newly established Department of Enhanced Citizen Affairs. Her crystalline form glowed with satisfaction as she listened to Sarah's report. The economic impact has been overwhelmingly positive, Sarah continued. Enhanced citizens have contributed to breakthroughs in deep space navigation, xenobiology research, and interspecies communication. The cetacean navigators alone have reduced hyperspace travel times by an average of 23%. Dr. Kelleth, who had documented every aspect of the transformation for scientific posterity, raised one of her 8 arms. Cadet Chen, what has been the psychological impact on enhanced citizens now that they have legal recognition? Sarah smiled, remembering her own first encounter with Marcus and the desperate hope in his amber eyes. Perhaps Marcus himself can answer that better than I can. Marcus rose gracefully and moved to the podium, his presence commanding respect rather than fear. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had helped reshape galactic civilization. The transformation has been profound, he said simply. For years we lived in a strange limbo, serving faithfully while knowing we had no legal protection, no rights, no guarantee that our service meant anything beyond our immediate utility. Now we serve not as property but as citizens. We serve not because we must, but because we choose to. He paused, looking out over the diverse audience. But the most important change is not legal or economic. It is the simple dignity of being recognized for what we have always been. Thinking, feeling beings with hopes, dreams, fears, and aspirations. We are no longer curiosities or weapons or specimens. We are citizens of the galaxy. The applause was thunderous, coming from representatives of species that had never before agreed on anything. The transformation had indeed been remarkable, not just for enhanced beings, but for the coalition itself, which had discovered a capacity for moral growth that many had thought impossible. Commander Zix-9, who had initially resisted the changes, now served as one of the Academy's most effective instructors on enhanced rights and interspecies cooperation. His transformation from rigid military protocol to adaptive leadership had become a case study in institutional evolution. The implications extend far beyond enhanced beings, he told the audience, when called upon to speak. Recognition of intelligence wherever it appears has forced us to reconsider our relationships with artificial intelligences, quantum consciousness entities, and even the possibility of first contact with truly alien forms of awareness. The precedent set here will guide coalition policy for generations. As the formal presentation concluded, the audience began to disperse, but many lingered to speak directly with Marcus and Elena. Children from a dozen different species approached the massive enhanced being with curiosity rather than fear, asking questions about his experiences and his thoughts on their futures in a galaxy where consciousness took many forms. Sarah watched from the side of the hall, remembering that day 6 months ago when a frightened creature in a cage had looked at her with desperate hope. The transformation seemed almost miraculous, but she knew it had been built on simple recognition of truth. Intelligence deserved respect, consciousness deserved protection, and personhood transcended the circumstances of one's origin. Elena approached her, still marveling at how different everything had become. "You know," she said quietly, "Marcus has never forgotten that moment when you first spoke to him with kindness. He says it was the first time in months that someone had looked at him and seen a person rather than a thing." "I saw what was already there," Sarah replied. "I just wasn't blinded by expectations about what intelligence was supposed to look like." Marcus joined them, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his place in the world. "Sarah," he said formally, "I wanted to thank you again for your courage that day. Your willingness to see beyond surface appearances changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands of my brothers and sisters." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her throat. "You changed things yourself, Marcus. You spoke with such dignity, such hope, even while being treated as property. That's what really moved people to action." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, "but courage is contagious. One person's willingness to stand up for what's right gives others permission to do the same." As the three of them stood together in the now empty lecture hall, they represented something unprecedented in galactic history, proof that different forms of consciousness could not only coexist, but could work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Outside the Academy windows, the lights of Coalition space stretched out toward infinity, each point of light representing worlds where enhanced citizens now worked alongside their unmodified colleagues as equals. The change that had begun in a single lecture hall with one desperate creature's plea for recognition had rippled outward across the galaxy, transforming not just laws and institutions, but hearts and minds. The beast that had been brought to intimidate a class had instead taught the galaxy's greatest lesson: that consciousness, in whatever form it takes, deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to choose its own destiny among the stars. In the end, it had not been humanity's technology or military might that had impressed the galaxy. It had been their simple recognition that family, loyalty, and love could transcend the boundaries of species, genetics, and origin. And in learning to see enhanced beings as more than property, the Coalition had discovered something profound about its own capacity for growth, compassion, and moral courage. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibilities that no one could have imagined when a caged creature had first looked into a young woman's eyes and begged to be seen as more than the sum of his genetic modifications. The galaxy had listened, and in doing so, had become something greater than it had ever been before.